question. If behavioral economics, to quote you, helps us turn human understanding into a business advantage.
Yes.
Why didn't you turn it into a business advantage for Ogilvy UK only? Or for Ogilvy UK's clients only? Why?
Rather than going public with an IPA presidential
Exactly.
agenda. I have to be honest, it did occur to me, and it occurred to several of us when we discussed it. But we realised, and I suppose in a way this was a behavioural economics insight, or at least a psychological insight, that actually Coke needs Pepsi. Being the only player in a field is actually a disaster. If you're the only person who does something, the natural reaction of someone you present it to is not, gosh, that's unique. It's actually, this is strange, nobody else is doing this, why should I believe you? So to give an example, Dr. Nick Southgate, who was my partner and behavioural economics guru at the IPA, who we met, he said that the great mistake that all agencies made is they were obsessed with the idea of the USP, that they had to have some unique differentiator that differentiated their agency from everybody else, because this was a kind of, agency doctrine. And they're obsessed with the idea of USP, so every agency had to develop its own methodology, and clients would go in and say, what's your methodology for producing advertising? It's this one. I see, and who else does this? Nobody, just us. It's all ours, mine, all mine. Yeah. Now, the assumption was that this would have the effect on the person listening, as to say, well, since I want that methodology and only these people offer it, I must therefore appoint them to my whole business. The reality is, actually, their natural reaction is, if you're the only people doing it, it probably suggests it's not much good. That actually social proof, the fact that actually, and also, being absolutely candid, I always remember a quite telling thing, which is, I think, Kimberly-Clark, when they heard that P&G were getting into effectively paper production, lavatory paper, I suppose it must have been Charmin, would have been the brand. Kimberly-Clark actually celebrated, because they said, this will help make us better. And the idea that you yourself can create a discipline from scratch and carry it forth on your own, as one agency, I think is fundamentally mistaken. I think we all get better from competition.
Plus, I guess it's easier to get your clients to accept
this
new philosophy if their competitors do it too. Huh?
Yes, absolutely right. There's also, if you like, a bigger risk, which is that, and this is a whole industry issue, which is if the ad agency had left it 5 or 6 years and showed no interest in behavioural science, which was not impossible, by the way, still isn't, and I'm still surprised how little interest there is. Had Ogilvy been around and read Nudge, there's no doubt at all that he would have been captivated from the start.
Of course.
Yeah. And the interesting thing there is that there was a danger, what we shouldn't forget, is that that consulting firms who are eager to get into the marketing space and to get into the marketing budgets as it is, would make this their own. Be able to speak, I don't think they'd be able to have better ideas than us, but they'd be able to speak very convincingly about it and demonstrate a couple of case studies where they demonstrate an ROI of 121% for an intervention costing $20,000. And if the consulting firms who got into this, they would have been less good at it than us, but they might have been more convincing. And if we'd left this for 6 or 7 years, we could have actually lost out completely, and actually the ad agency ecosystem would have actually slipped even further down the food chain. There's a third point which I think is important. As the IPA job, the job is to look at the business from an industry perspective, not an agency perspective. And to be absolutely candid, I think most of our agency problems are endemic to the whole industry. Everybody in Ogilvy, everybody in BBH, everybody in Abbey goes on and going, isn't this terrible? And then you meet together at the IPA and people go, so it's exactly the same shit for you, is it? Basically, we're all dealing with the same crap. This isn't unique to me. This is actually a problem that's endemic in the entire industry. Now, my take on that is that there are tens of thousands of people called account people around the world who are paid varying amounts of money to smooth the relationship between an agency and a client's marketing department. But that's the proximate problem, it's not the ultimate problem. The ultimate problem that bedevils both marketing and marketing agencies is there is no common language and there is no bridge and there is no connection between the marketing function and the rest of the business. Now I would argue, for God's sake, don't tell my account people friends this, if we could solve the ultimate problem and get people in finance and get people with an engineering background and get people who are in different parts of the business to appreciate the value of psychological solutions, then actually the relationship between agency and client becomes much easier. The real problem of presenting to a client isn't actually marketing people often move between agencies and marketing departments. When you have a WACL event or an IPA event, they all get on perfectly amicably. The problem is this huge yawning gulf of misunderstanding that exists between marketing and everything else in the business, particularly finance, and of course the CEO who...
Because it is La La Land.
In fairness, we've had the vocabulary of La La Land. No one's attempted to actually found marketing thinking on any recognisable scientific experimentation or insight, really. And the vocabulary we use is terrible. As I said, if you go to a finance guy or someone whose degree is in engineering, it's quite common, chief operating officers will often have a background in something like that, and you talk about brand iconography or totemic, okay? That's like going to the head of thoracic surgery at St Mary's Paddington and saying we must trust to the healing power of the crystal. It makes you sound like a whack job. You might as well get out tarot cards for all the convincing you're actually doing here.
Branding made it totally intangible.
Well, also branding is a totally unscientific word because the word brand can be used to mean pretty much anything you want it to mean within the context of the given sentence. And so I'm comfortable with, I'm absolutely convinced of the importance of brands, by the way.
Of course.
But I'm very uncomfortable with the word simply because it's been stretched beyond all recognition in what it means. I better just stop now. And just very quickly
I'm afraid my next question is a bit too short for you.
Well, don't worry,
for me. But I was just wondering. You mentioned nudge before, but you never, or almost never, use the term nudge in the sense of Sunstein's and Thaler's book in your talks.
Ooh.
Is this a coincidence, or do you dislike the term?
No, I have...
I heard it once, maybe, in like 20 talks.
It's important because it's very important for the idea of... Now that's strange because you're actually noticing a dog that didn't bark in the night. Emphatically not intentional on my part. It may be because one of the uses and one of the important reasons for the use of the word nudge is that it creates the idea, particularly in government. Okay. Now what you haven't now
you have your nudge tank here.
Well, you see, what you haven't seen filmed, because generally they're in private, are talks I give to government or public sector or social marketing audiences. And in that case, I will use the phrase nudge more. I mean, nudge has, patently, it's a very valuable definition of what Buckminster Fuller called trim tab, where a small intervention has a disproportionately large effect.
Exactly.
Complexity theory, butterfly theory, chaos theory, a lot of people understand the fact that actually there isn't, in a complex system, there isn't necessarily a proportionate relationship between the size of the intervention and the size of the effect.
Exactly.
There's a second reason for which Thaler and Sunstein used nudge, which is equally important, if you like, which is to make clear to government that there is this space between complete laissez-faire self-destruction and legislative, fascistic control of the populace. The libertarian paternalism, which was originally at one point going to be the title of their book, and I'm delighted they did not make that the title of the book because it would have gone nowhere, a book with that title. Nudge was a rebranding of libertarian paternalism. And therefore it's probably more appropriate for public sector or social marketing use than it is for marketing in general.
Let me ask you a nasty question about the ethical problems that might be associated with behavioral economics. For example, people are not conscious of their biases, so marketers could potentially exploit them. Do you see any new subliminal advertising here? Are you a new hidden persuader?
Interesting. The reason advertising partly abandoned its interest in behavioural science and psychology was I think it got frightened when books like The Hidden Persuaders came out.
Motivation research.
Ernest Dichter,
exactly.
Weird Austrians with Viennese accents talking about the unconscious, or cigarettes being torches of freedom, or phallic imagery, or whatever it may be. At that era, there were loads of films like The Manchurian Candidate. There was widespread fear of brainwashing by communists. And as a defensive manoeuvre, the ad industry just got out of psychology completely, because since they were making money running big ads on TV, and to justify big ads on TV, you don't need detailed psychological understanding necessarily. They were basically happy to jettison it for reasons of expediency. The point about the ethical dilemma is always there, because at a very simple level, I can tell an airline always to say only 3 seats left at this price, when it's completely untrue. Interesting ethical debate. If you say only 4 seats left at this price on the EasyJet or Ryanair website, and it is indeed true, but the next 10 seats are in fact cheaper, because at this price implies, but does not say, at this low price, okay? We assume that prices of airline seats go up, but the line does not say that at this price. You know, the next price could be 1p higher, it could be £10 less, okay? So first of all, but secondly, that could just be a lie. There could be 50 seats left, and you get people to buy the seats by pretending there are only 3 of them left. Could Amazon... Now, I've noticed Amazon occasionally, I was buying some books yesterday and it said only 2 left. Now, I assume Amazon's telling me the truth. Because... And the reason I assume that is that one of the brutal things, that the reasons why consumers prefer big brands, is big brands have more to lose if they get found out.
That's true, yeah.
So in game theoretic terms, the fact that someone has a valuable reputation means that they are more fragile to scandal.
Exactly.
They're more vulnerable to scandal. Therefore, they will probably behave more ethically towards their customers than someone who is either has a brand that's little known, has no reputational value, or in the real world...
Advertising makes the brand more ethical.
Well,
that's a good thing.
Not necessarily for altruistic reasons, but fear of getting found out is at least it helps.
Absolutely.
I mean, this goes back to Plato and Gyges in the Ring. Is that in the Republic?
Yeah, the classicist in you. Exactly, yeah.
If we were invisible, let's be honest about this, how ethical would we really be? Secondly, we shouldn't forget that, I mean, this is, what you might call marketing to people's unconscious goes on all the time between people.
It's true.
Probably the best marketer in the world, or the person who's most astute to what other people are thinking of them, is someone, for example, on a first date. It's all marketing.
It is.
I mean, one hotel website, if you arrive with a Safari browser, it means you're browsing on an iOS Mac bit of equipment. They don't quote you higher prices for hotels, but they do default to showing you swankier hotels. Now, is that unethical? You could argue, well, look, you're framing the choice a bit here.
It is.
The point about this unethical behaviour is that if you are discovered, you will be punished not in proportion to the gains, but entirely disproportionately.
Backfires.
Because actually our urge is, when someone with a reputation, when someone who lays claim to a high reputation lets us down, we are disproportionately vengeful and retaliatory towards that person.
Let me ask you another question. You designed this wonderful matrix representing the cost-effectiveness of interventions, and you had consultants in the top left quadrant, wonderful.
Mischievous, sorry.
Yeah, mischievous, but in your talk you didn't have a name for the people in the bottom right quadrant, which I didn't get, because why don't you just call them creatives? Isn't creative problem solving?
It's more complex. I think it's more complex than that. In painting, creativity often belongs in the bottom right. I think design often belongs in the bottom right.
That's where it should be.
I also think there are other spheres, like, for example, network theory and so forth.
Psychology-based interventions.
Yes. The reason it needs a name is simply because we don't... What I'm not saying, by the way, is the other quadrants are always... total waste of time. I was being a bit unfair there. What's emphatically true is we spend too little time proportionately looking for trim tab interventions.
Exactly.
Because what we tend to do is we go, I've got a budget of £5 million, therefore I will look for a £5 million solution.
If I have money, I want to spend it.
I want to spend it. And incidentally, this is not quite so true, by the way, of family-owned businesses, where it's their own money.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, why don't you just make a case for creativity versus consultants? Creative problem solving.
I think we can now, because I think advances in science are very good news for creative people, because they start to explain. First of all, creative people often seem odd to other people because they don't really have a sense of proportion. You know, the characteristically difficult creative behaviour is they make a huge fuss about something which seems trivial. But of course, once you understand the complexity of things, they may be right to do so. It may be the small thing that really matters.
Absolutely.
So creative crankiness is explained there. The second thing is that I think we'll start just... Thank you very much indeed. Would you like coffee? I expect you would.
Coffee would be wonderful. Thanks so much.
Cappuccino?
What are you having?
I might have a cappuccino.
Cappuccino? Yeah. I'll join you.
Perfect. 2 cappuccinos. We love it. Thank you very much indeed. Do you want anything small, like some cheese or anything like that? Are you absolutely sure?
Perfectly fine.
Okay, no problem at all. But thank you ever so much. But no, what's interesting there is that I think economics is this evil enemy of creativity because it makes a series of assumptions in order to neaten the world. Perfect information, markets in equilibrium, trust can be taken as a given, all products are commodities, etc. Now, all of those are totally untrue and inapplicable in the real world. What they've done is they've created, for example, an imaginary world in which marketing shouldn't exist because we already know everything about those products already. But even in the age of the internet, that is so far from reality as to be absolutely insane.
You talked about design quickly before. Let's go back to that same matrix. And what would you say if I put advertising top right, efficient but expensive, and design, let's say in an ideal way?
It can be efficient and inexpensive, yeah.
I mean, are designers coming up with those small changes that can have huge effects?
Well, I can give that the most simple example. Packaging design, changing your packaging, can have an effect equivalent to many times that money spent on advertising.
That's it.
And yet...
Or interface design.
And yet, for reasons I don't follow, and interface design equally. And yet, you know, Curly Portobello is part of the Ogilvy Group. The amount they're paid, given the value they create, and the extent to which they have to quibble over relatively small sums around the cost of, transformational design of a product, strikes me as utterly weird.
Aren't they in the sweet spot of technology, psychology?
Interface designers, experience designers. I'm talking to Matt Watkinson, who wrote a very good book called The 10 Principles of Customer Experience.
Yeah.
And one of the conclusions we've come to is that actually, in terms of improving the customer experience, very small, unexpected good things may actually be the most powerful thing you can do.
That's it.
I don't know if you ever noticed this, the worst hotels you ever stay at aren't cheap hotels, by the way. A good 3-star hotel that knows it's a 3-star hotel, isn't pretending to be anything else, and actually just does a few things better than you expect, is actually a great experience. The worst hotels in the world, and I've stayed in a few of them, are hotels that think they're 5-star hotels, but they're really not. And I've stayed in quite a few in France, where because you're in a grand building and you have a Michelin-starred restaurant in the hotel, you then say, well, we are a 5-star grand hotel and we'll charge £200 a night. Now, I'm sorry, mate, but if you're a 5-star hotel, I want to be able to ring up at 11 o'clock at night and say, I want a Caesar salad or some snack. I want you to bring me coffee to my bloody room. Instead, you go to these hotels and they're expensive because all the money goes into a kind of pomposity. But in some cases, we couldn't even get lunch at the hotel, for example. It was in the middle of the countryside.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but so far only very few agencies have understood that behavioral economics can dramatically increase marketing effectiveness.
I think within most agencies there will be planner converts and creative converts. We've formalised it a bit. It's also fair to say that Draft in Chicago
I know, the Institute of Decision Making
has created an Institute of Decision Making, for which all credit, and look forward to whether it's, I guess it's co-opetition. Very happy to see that, no problems at all. Equally, within one of the most important developments has been the arrival of behavioural thinking and far better psychological thinking within the market research sector as well. Because if that doesn't buy it, then everything else falls in a sense. And the understanding that, very simple understanding, one, the reasons we give behind our actions are largely post-rationalisation.
I know.
Two, we don't have introspective access to large parts of the brain which controls either our attention or indeed our decisions.
My explanation is maybe lots of agencies still see advertising as an art and don't want it to become a science. Could that be a reason? Or is it too academic?
It's interesting that it is interesting that the two people. Okay, I come from. I did classics myself, but I come from. My brother's an astrophysicist. On both my mother's and father's side, we've had various scientists, including someone I think who worked on the South African nuclear bomb project a few years ago.
Oh,
so there you
didn't
go.
know there was any.
Yeah, no, they've got the bomb.
Okay.
Well, so he said. And my great great aunt was an anthropologist, a woman called Beatrice Blackwood, who was effectively one of the three sort of big creators of the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, and was a major figure in, I think it was the cuckoo of the Upper Wotut were her specialism. But I mean, she travelled everywhere, met Margaret Mead, who she thought was a bullshitter, interestingly, because I must say I've long been suspicious. And it's equally true that Jez, who's my partner in crime and co-founder of Ogilvy Change, is a biochemist. Brian Sassoon, a brilliant planner at Ogilvy, is a geneticist, and I've always actually pushed Ogilvy to hire up people from both the soft and hard sciences, because there's a natural tendency for arts graduates to gravitate your way. Nothing wrong with them at all, but you don't want everybody to be a bloody arts graduate.
So you think it has to do with your different culture?
No, it's not. I don't know that it's that. It may be that people like to do things that play to their strengths.
Cool. Yeah.
That's possible. It's also interesting that in the digital world and the research world, and there are quite a lot of people who work in research. If you go to Kantar, there are quite a lot of people with a background in neuroscience or other things. There's quite a lot of comfort with it here. The other point I'm making is this isn't actually science. It's actually a mixture of science in the service of art and art in the service of science. What I do see as a problem is the fact that actually a lot of things that creative people believe instinctively may be right, but they haven't had the science to back up their intuition.
That's it. To me, one of the key learnings of behavioral economics is that advertising agencies, and especially advertising creatives, should expand their notion of creativity. Let's say when we look at the $300 million button case, isn't changing that button from register to continue highly creative?
Some of the richest guys in the creative industries in 10 years' time will be people in experience design, I don't know the word phrase, usability, choice architects,
interface.
Web design, interface design will be among the rock and roll spaces.
That's it.
I think there will be a class of rock and roll interface designer who will just rock up, charge 20,000 and drive out of town again. I hope so, because otherwise there's no economic justice in the world. They're worth it, okay?
Definitely.
The definition of creativity needs to change as the media environment changes, because when it was TV, you needed people who could make a good 30-second film. You still need those people. You still need lots of those people, and you need to pay them well, and they need to be really good, because making really good 30-second films is really, really important.
I know.
But you also need to cover the waterfront all the way through, well, I hate the phrase customer journey because it makes it sound linear, but at other touch points.
360.
Yeah. And some of those touch points may be more important than your TV commercial because they're cheap to do, they get less attention. The one thing I always thought that direct marketing was right about is old-style direct marketing copywriters used to say, when you start writing a direct response off the page ad, start with the coupon. Decide what choice you're going to offer them. So start with the choice architecture and then work outwards from there. Then write the copy, then write the headline.
Yeah.
So they actually said, write the ad backwards.
Start from the call to action.
Now, that makes sense, because starting from the point of transaction and working out is, from an engineering perspective, the only logical thing to do. Because
Absolutely.
if your choice architecture's shit,
Yeah.
you could produce the best TV commercial in the world, and it would either be useless or at least highly inefficient. But I like this also, because as you said, the redefinition of creativity, behavioural economics presents you with a series of tools. But one of the things that slightly worried me when I first got into this was thought, hold on, if these tools become universal, lots of people will be able to use them and they don't need us anymore. What I discovered, dealing with actually very good academic behavioural scientists, is that you can't beat agency people for turning an insight into an actionable idea. You can have the insight, but the actual business of translating an insight into an idea is a fundamentally creative act. Getting from, my guess is that Shlomo Benazzi is actually pretty damn creative, having spoken to him a few times on the phone. But getting from the insight in terms of hyperbolic discounting, loss aversion and so forth, to the save more tomorrow pension is actually a creative act.
Of course it is, yeah.
And machines can't really do it.
Yeah.
Or at least they can't do it effectively and they can't do it interestingly. And so the great thing is that if you feed creative people with the right insights, good creative people will turn any insight, particularly if they have a reasonable understanding and a reasonably media-neutral approach to problem solving. And actually a lot of creative people like the creative task, the creative brief, because it's finding the solution to a puzzle.
But then again, I imagine, let's look at the opt-in, opt-out organ donor thing.
Yeah.
No, not even the best creative campaign in the world could have such a dramatic effect. And isn't this sort of...
No, that's true. I mean, I've seen quite a lot of things done behaviourally where you just change the choice architecture, you change the framing, where the effect is kind of almost an order of magnitude higher than you'd achieve through certainly a one-off ad campaign. And the effect may be longer lasting as well. There's an argument that you have to keep advertising for it to maintain its effect.
And
after all,
register
Behavioural
continually
makes the point that you're not advertising to a standing army, you're advertising to a moving parade. That's his quote. And actually, if you improve your choice architecture, that $300 million button on the e-tail site, that's made them $300 million a year plus, not just the first year they did it, but every year. So arguably, it's the $1 billion button.
That's right. That's right.
And so you're absolutely right that changing design so that the behaviour you want becomes therefore not just adopted but habitual, which is of course the great strength of design as well. The great strength of design is it works in ways that you're not even conscious of. It affects your behaviour or your enjoyment of something in ways you're not even conscious of, and it affects it at its very best, it affects it forever as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Becomes a new behaviour.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think a good agency like Ogilvy should give decent thought to futurity and endurance of the contribution that ideas make when allocating its effort.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can come up with an idea that improves things by 1% but will do so in perpetuity, that's quite an important idea.
It is.
If you come up with 3 of those ideas, what you'll probably find is they don't improve things by 3%, they improve it by 9%. Because good behavioural tweaks, it's what Warren Buffett's business partner, Charlie Munger, calls a Lollapalooza effect. If you have 2 or 3 behavioural biases acting in concert, they don't add, they multiply. And so the effect actually becomes kind of exponential. If you have 3 or 4 of those things and they work in a complementary fashion, then their effect is exponential. Now that, over time in perpetuity, is actually, that changes the valuation of a company, potentially. Even the dumbest analyst is going to kind of notice.
But of course you combine it. You do the ad campaign to drive the people to the website where there is the $300 million button.
Absolutely.
You do both.
But then you're advertising, once you've invented the $300 million button, your advertising, let's assume it's quite good advertising to begin with, becomes very good advertising.
Of course.
Because the likelihood that the people the ad drives to the site then go on to buy is increased. So this is why that direct marketing approach of start with the transaction and work out is the only intellectually valid thing. Yet, if you look at the status of people within the advertising creative community, It's in reverse.
I know.
The closer you are to the point of transaction, the lower your status.
I know. Still.
So it's like a weird football team
Yeah.
where the strikers are all completely unknown and badly paid, and the goalkeepers are kind of paid a fortune.
That's, to be honest, I'm not surprised that someone...
By the way, I know nothing about football, so that may be a really shit analogy.
neither.
Okay,
Neither.
sorry.
But I'm
okay.
not surprised that it's someone coming from direct marketing who sees the potential of behavioral economics. I'm not surprised. Maybe if you were in a traditional or above the line.
And also the potential of digital, because
Absolutely.
we understood, one of the great advantages, Ogilvy had a few advantages when digital came along. One was just David Ogilvy's legacy, which is, I'm not saying we all wear what would David do jewellery, but there was no ambiguity that had David been 20 years younger when this stuff came along, he would have found it fascinating. He promoted direct mail long before it was fashionable. He put his name above the door of the direct agency, which most ad agency groups did not do. They had it operating under some separate brand. The other thing was we had an extensive... we were also very lucky with our clients, so that our direct marketing network worldwide was very largely the product of a relationship with American Express, which was, of course, a direct mail-driven business, particularly in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
Less so now, obviously. Then, actually, we were lucky enough to have Microsoft and Compaq and then IBM just at the time that the internet came on.
Exactly.
So bear in mind, we did have... I always think it's absolutely fair in writing a narrative that you pay due tribute to the goddess of fortune.
You were at the right time at the right place.
Because we had the right clients in the right place
with the
at
right
the right time.
Exactly.
Okay? Now, that's really the management of the company at the time.
Plus you had the right background.
They didn't fuck it up. I mean, nobody... we didn't... Had we had some deranged CEO who decided that the internet was the work of Satan, all of this would have been perhaps to naught. But what we did have also was IBM, if you think about it, was a brand that had a target audience who were the first to get online. Now, had you gone to Kellogg's at the same time as your biggest client and said, we want to do internet advertising, they, with some reason, might say, give it another 5 years, mate. But, I mean, actually, it's worth remembering, actually, how wrong a lot of people... Stelios of EasyJet fame. Generally, I think, pretty admirable guy. But he actually refused to actually allow online booking for EasyJet. He put his phone number along the side of the plane and he said, it's just for geeks.
Well,
and now I think 96% of their business is booked online. It's certainly in the high 90s. Interestingly, I remember reading a very damning report saying how stupid it was that pizza delivery firms were offering online ordering, because if you want to order a pizza, you pick up the phone. Okay? And lots of people said, we tried this online ordering for pizzas, but it didn't work, so we're going to give it up and we're just going to go back to the phone. But then a few things have happened since. One, I can't understand the printed menu at Domino's because there are too many choices. Once you have stuffed crust... No, I'm just getting a bit pervy and weird here. There are certain fast food brands I'm obsessed with just for behavioural reasons. You have stuffed crust, thick base, deep pan, blah-de-blah. Then you can have a half and half. Then there are 4 sizes. My brain cannot cope with that many variables without a website to take me through the choices. Okay?
Exactly.
You also upsell much more online because in a conversation on the telephone, you can say, would you like to supersize that once? But you can't do it 5 times because you sound like a nutbag, okay? Whereas online, you can actually put in complementary goods alongside the main item and cross-sell more effectively. But also the choice architecture is more manageable. The other thing is, of course, that maybe online pizza ordering was never going to be more than 30-40%. Add the mobile phone app, however, and I think something like 45 to 50% of Domino's business is mobile app driven. Maybe mobile app may include the browser as well, but they have a specific mobile site. But actually, it's now highly significant.
Absolutely.
But in timing terms, we were bloody lucky. I mean, having those clients, and then subsequently Cisco, then subsequently quite a few, BT in the UK, likewise, were selling broadband. So we were lucky with our client base, emphatically, lucky with the fact that we were strong in direct marketing when digital came along, so the mental contortions needed were much less than if you'd been a pure play ad agency.
And do your clients allow you to look beyond the promotion P only at the price P,
Yes.
place P, product P?
A few things without going into confidential detail. Much to my intense joy, Philips, our client, has someone who is head of marketing and innovation.
That's good. And not marketing and sales.
British Airways has awarded us a business which is digital business, but it's actually responsibility for digital marketing and innovation.
That's very good.
So that can encompass things like, a new seat design, or, what's in-flight entertainment going to be, or whatever.
Baking the advertising into the product.
But why not? After all, the insights from the new social sciences should have effects on everything from pricing to product to all 5 Ps plus some other stuff, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Very interestingly, Peter Drucker, who's Austrian, I didn't realise, I thought he was German.
I know.
He was best mates with Schumpeter, who was also, of course, Austrian as an economist, and his dad actually taught Schumpeter at the University of Vienna. And one of Drucker's comments is very interesting. There are only 2 things that make a company money. There's marketing and innovation, everything else is a cost. Now that sounds a really weird thing to say, unless you understand Austrian school economics, where one of the tenets of Austrian school economics is that all value is subjective.
Absolutely.
Therefore, marketing, which alters the subjective valuation of something, is just as valid a creator of value.
It is.
So what an Austrian would say is that marketing and innovation are actually 2 sides of the same coin. And the reason for this is, how do you create value from an Austrian school perspective? You either find something that's easy for you to make and find out a way to make people want it, or you find out what people want and work out a way for them to make it.
Absolutely.
But actually, the idea that those 2 things should be separate disciplines within an organisation, whereas actually creating and satisfying the want are actually the same world looked through the different end of the telescope, seems to be... So Philips's insight in terms of having a head of marketing innovation, British Airways allocating an account which is both digital marketing and innovation.
Excellent.
And thirdly, the interesting thing with... So I can't give these things away, for obvious reasons of confidentiality. But the discussion, for example, with British Airways is actually: do you compete with low cost, or do you super premiumise? That has very important aspects of psychology and positioning and relative.
Framing,
the fact that our brains work comparatively.
Let me get to my last question.
Sorry.
Obviously, I'm very biased here because I wrote a book about things small. But I heard you talk about the importance of sweating the small stuff.
Yeah.
About the huge effect small changes can have. Isn't think small maybe sort of a slogan for a second revolution in advertising, this time based on behavioral economics?
Yes, it could
and
be.
You said
it could
dare to be trivial too. Trivial meaning
dare
small.
Dare to be trivial. In other words, one of the reasons it helped me being the vice chairman is... One of the things in advertising is there are some quite banal things which no one says, okay, because they seem banal. And you've got to be reasonably senior to say them, because otherwise everybody just thinks you're an idiot and ignores you. So one of the things is that TV ads with animals in are always very successful, okay? Now, if you look at the greatest copywriter in the UK, John Webster, he nearly always put, whether it was the Smash Martians, which are kind of animals, if you see what I mean, or literal animals, the bear, crested bear, the Hofmeister bear, etc.
It helps.
The meerkats are a later manifestation of Websterism to an extent. And everybody agrees that it's brilliant and genius, but no one seems willing to do it themselves. So I was going and looking at a various range of mail packs, and there were 6 things selling a particular product, and one of them, they said, was much more successful than the other 5. And they were going through all manner of things about format and offer, etc. I said, it's got lots of rabbits on it. That's the reason. People like animals because they like animals in a weird way more than they like other people. Because they, and I said, look, no one else will be allowed to say this.
That's true.
No one else will be allowed to say this. The reason this thing is 4 times more successful than the other is it's got loads of cartoon animals on it, and it will always work. Now, why no brief says in the advertising industry, make sure there's some animals? Dulux, the dog, the gecko for Geico, okay? Why no planner? And the reason is self-aggrandizement. It doesn't go well to go home on a kind of high 5-figure salary to all your intellectual Oxbridgey friends back in North London, and to look down under the Guardian, over the copy of the bloody Guardian. Planners are all a bunch of lefties in my view. And basically say, what did you do today? I told the people to put some animals in the ad, because it's actually beneath our dignity. Now, that business of dignity is a very interesting one because it's a huge driver of human behaviour, our sense of dignity, because it's something that's always running in our head. And so, dare to be trivial partly comes from that, overcoming that sense of your own importance, that you have to always propose grandiose solutions to things, when in reality, actually, and of course all financial incentives tend to be orchestrated that way as well, big interventions, become famous, etc. Because let's face it, the $300 million button is, let's face it, on a par with Think Small in terms of its economic effects.
It is.
And yet no one knows whose idea it was.
That's true.
I don't know who came up with it. It cost 20,000.
It's an interface designer. No. His name is.
Well, he should be a rock star.
He should be.
He should be basically sitting in a kind of Hefner mansion of interface design in his velvet smoking jacket. That's how he should be living. He probably isn't. He probably paid, I don't know, some dismally small amount of money.
I guess so. $15, I guess.
I think it cost them 30,000 to do the research and 10,000 to implement it, or maybe the other way around. So it's trivial stuff for the return. But that's a really creative guy who should be really famous. But our own self-aggrandizement makes it difficult for us to come up with those things because we always want to believe that what we're doing is important. I've got no time for briefs which have what you might call an intermediate objective, like awareness or attitude. Because every brief, to truly inspire creativity from a creative department, and creative people are as good as the brief. No, they're as good as they are, plus the briefs they're given. Of course, they're as good as the weak link in that chain. Okay, maybe they're just a bit shit. Maybe the brief's shit. If you give a great creative a shit brief, they'll do shit work.
That's it. Garbage in and out.
If you want to get the value out of creative people, the brief must have a behavioural objective. Because then you've said, this is what success looks like. Anything that gets us closer to this is ergo a good idea. If you have an attitudinal brief, first of all, it automatically assumes television, because if you want to have attitudinal shift...
It assumes brand. It assumes brand.
And Dave Trott is absolutely right. Everybody immediately starts talking about brand.
The answer is brand. What's the question?
But maybe your brand's fine for another,
Of course.
I mean, for goodness sake, yes, of course, brand reputation is hugely important. You can allow it to deteriorate. It's a fatal mistake to make. There is an argument that you need to keep spending on brand partly so that part of your budget isn't allowed to disappear, because you will need it again, trust me, okay? And, but he's absolutely right that you don't have to see everything from a brand's eye view of the world either, that, maybe that's not, maybe that's not your problem. So I think he's absolutely right. I think he's the best planner in London, really, isn't he? Which is interesting. It's an interesting debate. How because I think the separation of planning and creative has been, as with the separation of media and creative, has been very damaging to the ability of the business to really tackle what matters, and it's turned the whole thing into a kind of linear process, which it never should have been. And I always make this argument that trying to solve an advertising problem by putting creative and media people in completely different buildings is like trying to solve a Sudoku by cutting it in half and handing out the two halves of the grid to different people. You'll never solve it.
Let's hope that behavioural economics is becoming like a glue to unite them again. Planners, media people, creatives.
This actually is rather neat, because
clients.
You know how as a copywriter it's always really nice to sort of end the copy with a little cheeky link back to the opening paragraph. It's kind of a slam dunk in body copywriting.
I know.
That cheeky little... whether consumers give a shit about this, but it's probably just writers showing off that they can link back to the thing and close the loop. But you asked the question why make this an industry thing, not an Ogilvy thing. I do think, however, that if it succeeds in the industry, Ogilvy is particularly well placed to profit, precisely because the appeal of this thing, partly as IPA president, but partly as someone working in Ogilvy, and Jez has found exactly the same thing, is Ogilvy covers the waterfront from activation, sales, promotion, engagement, design, in the case of Coley Porter Bell, public relations, advertising, direct marketing, digital. We're reasonably well represented or very well represented in all of those categories. But the great thing about behavioural economics is it is actually a common language and approach. I'm not going to call it a process, because it shouldn't be, nor should it be necessarily a methodology, and I'll explain why maybe in a separate talk, why I don't really believe in a single standalone process. Because I don't think the human brain is a unitary thing. Therefore, I don't think that any one process...
We leave that to the consultants.
No,
the
exactly.
processes.
No.
Yeah.
My view is that actually we use a heuristic toolbox. Different people use different tools at different times. David Kurtzman believes that there's no particular need for different parts of the brain even to be consistent. If you're not conscious of them, there's no actual need for consistency, internal consistency.
Right.
He thinks the model of the brain is a bit like the iPhone. We have different apps which we turn off. Sometimes they run in the foreground, sometimes they run in the background, sometimes they're switched off, sometimes we switch from one to the other very rapidly. So I'll give you an idea of that, your mode of thinking. If you imagine you're watching a pornographic film, okay, and suddenly a tiger comes into the room. It's probably fair to say, I've never actually tried this, but your general mode of thinking flips within about half a second.
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I imagine that the film very rapidly becomes less erotic or arousing.
Unless you're German, of course.
Well, because in German you regard the tiger as an additional improvement. Because it adds an extra layer of
welcome.
Welcome. Exactly.
Yeah, join us.
Right, we're going to war.
I'll cut this out. No, I won't. I won't.
But the fabulous thing there is that actually to basically try and create a theory of everything in the social sciences is probably, therefore, in terms of predicting behaviour, is always going to be difficult. As with probably meteorology, there are general things you can look at, but you will never perfect it. And incidentally, with meteorology, you always put people alongside data.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just let the meteorological models do the talking. They have people who interrogate the models, make inferences, devise theories, etc. And that's very important. Big data on its own is, as I said, the people who really know about this stuff believe that data plus people is better than data or people. And the idea that you somehow make something more scientific by removing humans from the equation is dangerous. But what's interesting there is that because it covers all these bases, Ogilvy and Jez has found this, having moved from a couple of previous agencies, that you have here something where you can actually deploy all people to look at a problem using a vocabulary which is at least common to all, which I think in terms of better integrated solutions. And integration, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean 360 degrees. You may say, actually, let's ignore 290 degrees and concentrate just on these 70. Doesn't mean you have, I think we had that orgy at Cannes a few years ago, where here's the Facebook page, here's the YouTube page, here's the so-and-so, here's the social page, and you're going, oh, for fuck's sake,
Through the line.
It was just going bonkers. But actually, being able to deploy whichever 70 degrees works best, then I think that's really, really interesting. But also, I think what it can do is raise the status of those disciplines which are closer to the point of decision making, because one of the great lessons of behavioural economics, apart from the fact that we're not conscious of the reasons behind most of our decision making, I won't get into free will at this point, but the other great insight of behavioural economics is we make decisions contextually. We've evolved to go, what do I do now? We haven't evolved the idea of carrying around constant preferences in our heads.
The interface is the behaviour.
The interface determines the behaviour, yeah. Emphatically.